Hi, this is Harriet Grayson, your host and the producer of Community Culture Showcase. And we are very fortunate today to have our guests who are going to talk about an amazing bunch of summer events this year in Groton. The city of Groton is just hosting all kinds of things starting in June, into July, August, into September. Wonderful activities, all free, all open to the public. And so we want to encourage people to come to, here it is, Summer in the City. And I have two guests here who are going to talk about the specific events going on. And it's an amazing history about the city of Groton. Who would know, right? So with me is Tom, who's going to talk about some very specific places in the city that he wants people to come and visit, and they're going to have tours. And then I have Mark, who wants to give us basically kind of overview of what's going to happen in summer in the city. So Mark, just give us a splash look at what we can expect this summer.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Harriet, for having me. And on behalf of the city of Groton, I'm very, very pleased to be here. There is a lot of activities going on in the city of Groton, thanks to Summer in the City this year. And we're very excited to present a wide variety of events. I am happen to be the lead coordinator for 3 of those events. The first one being Saturday, June 6th. It's the Eastern Point Artisan Craft Show and Fair. That is being held at Eastern Point Beach in and around the historic mansion known as the Zaberski House.
Okay.
And we are going to have a house filled with artists and crafters. On the exterior, we're going to have plant sales, and we're going to have a barber tent. We're going to have kiters out flying. We're going to have all kinds of music, venues for children. It's going to be a very exciting day. And we also want to tie that event into the history of Groton. The city of Groton, for such a small area, is just full of history, going back to the Revolutionary War all the way up till today. And Eastern Point primarily was known and is known as a turn of the last century summer cottage home community. And we have, of course, the beautiful homes as the Zaberski House. We have Brantford Manor at Avery Point, and of course the hotel. The Griswold Hotel once stood where the 16th green of the Shenancoshett Golf Course was.
Okay.
And which a lot of people don't know is the British actually landed at Eastern Point Beach on their march to Fort Griswold. So there's a lot of history there at that event. Yeah, we're very excited to be able to share all of that. Then I fast forward to July 18th, and we're having Art on Groton Bank, which is an outdoor art festival, which is going to be on the grounds of the beautiful and historic Bill Memorial Library, which is in what I call the beautiful historic village of Groton Bank. And we're going to have live music there. We're going to have food vendors. We're going to have book signings, lots and lots and lots of art.
Right.
We still have spaces available, so we do have a call to artists and to vendors to please contact us.
Right.
It's very popular, it's going, but we still have some room.
Right.
As Tom will talk to you a little bit more about in a little bit, Art on Groton Bank is, of course, full of history, very rich history.
Right.
Going on that day, there will be other activities at the Bill Memorial Library. There will be an open house at the Fort Griswold State Park, which is just a short walk down the street. So again, we're tying that event into our local history, and we're planning on having a lot of fun activities that day. Our capstone event that I'm involved in, then we go to September 13th, Sunday, and that is going to be the Thames Street Block Party, which is going to be right on the Thames River in the Puffin's Parking Lot Restaurant, which is across from the Avery Cop House Museum.
All right.
And again, it's going to be a little bit of a food festival. We're going to just take over with lots and lots and lots of local and regional food restaurants and food trucks that are going to be there. Again, we're going to have live music and lots of events for the entire family. There'll be an open house at the Avery Cop House Museum right across the street. We'll be having shuttle services running for parking, so there'll be no parking issues for anyone.
Okay, good.
And again, we're tying that into the historic area of Thames Street.
Okay.
And we all know that there's a great deal of maritime history, Thames Street at one point was a very big commercial hub for the area. So there's again a good tie-in
right.
there.
So who would know that the city of Groton has so much to offer? Now, I know you couldn't absorb all of this in. So we have a website. It's actually summerinthecity.com and also GrotonBankHA.com. So if you're looking for the specific information, absolutely go to those websites and check them out. And again, Mark continues to look for some vendors for that July event. So if you are some kind of artisan, an artist, if you have a special kind of product that you would like to bring to the public's attention, go ahead and get on to summerinthecity.com to get in touch with Mark, and perhaps you guys can come to some agreement.
Yes, I just want to make mention that
Yes.
all of these events that I'm talking about can also be found on social media.
Okay.
And just plug in the name and you'll find lots and lots of information and links for the artists and vendors to sign up right online as well.
Wonderful.
So we're
All
trying to
right.
make it as user-friendly as we possibly can.
Wonderful, wonderful. So that was our kind of overview of this incredible summer that we're going to have. And to give us some little taste of some pretty specific information about a beautiful, historic city of Groton. And I was telling Tom that my actual background is as an urban planner, so I'm always interested in hearing about the historic aspects of a city. So please, share your wisdom.
Well, thank you, Harriet. I'd like to tell you a bit about Groton Bank. It's become an abdication of mine for 45 years now, promoting this area.
Right.
When I moved to Groton, the term Groton Bank had been forgotten. And, of course, when we first started to revive it, people would say, well, I don't know if I want to put any money in your bank.
Right. Exactly.
And, of course, Groton Bank is a geographic area. It's the former name of the village, which used to be along the Thames River. This happens to be an 1868 map, and so yes, the terminology Groton Bank is legitimate. And by 1868, there were well over 100 structures along what's now Thames Street. It was then Bank Street, Old King's Road, which is Broad Street, and various other streets. So how did Groton Bank get its name in terms of Groton Bank? Well, back when New London was settled in 1643, of course, Groton was part of New London. And the east side simply became known as the East Bank. And when Groton became a separate town in 1705, then the East Bank became known as Groton Bank.
Interesting.
And this terminology remained as official terminology for almost until the end of the 1800s. And then it began to fade away. But the area is clearly one that's very rich in history. This area represents approximately a half a square mile today, or maybe 1% of the total geographic area of the town of Groton, 5% of the city.
Right.
But yet it has more history than most places in, this town and even the state.
Right.
And for example, there are a number of chapters in Groton Bank history that are worth noting. It started with shipbuilding in the late 1600s, and shipbuilding set many big records nationally and internationally. The largest ship in colonial America was launched in this area, just opposite where the Avery Copp Museum is today, and it was some 700 ton as a wooden ship.
Wow. Called
Jeffrey's Great Ship. Of course, shipbuilding continued along the Thames River with wooden ships on through the 1800s. In early 1900, there was a shipbuilding company called Eastern Shipbuilding, which had occupied the site where EB is today. And they built the largest steel freighters in the world.
Wow.
The Minnesota and the Dakota launched in 1903 and 4. And of course, most everyone is familiar with the record of submarines that have been built here, and the Nautilus, the first nuclear submarine, and so forth. And that's a whole chapter of history in itself. Another interesting chapter in Groton Bank history is that of defense. Most people know about Fort Griswold, which, as Mark alluded, the British had landed at Eastern Point and marched on up with 800 men to attack Fort Griswold in 1781. Of course, we only had about 160 defenders in the fort, and eventually, after 3 assaults, the British overtook the fort and massacred most of or about half of the patriots that were trying to defend it. Another chapter, there are other chapters, though, in Fort Griswold history that often are not mentioned. And for example, Fort Griswold was also Connecticut's major defense in the War of 1812. After all, if you remember, think about the war, the British had blockaded Long Island Sound, and they had this huge flotilla of boats between Watch Hill and New London. And of course, they had chased Commodore Decatur up into the Thames Harbor back in June of 1813 and kept him trapped there for the rest of the war. But the cannon from Fort Griswold could virtually hit any ship in the harbor because Fort Griswold is well over 100 feet above sea level.
Yes.
And the other advantage was ships at sea level could not raise their cannon high enough to lop cannonballs into Fort Griswold.
Well, good positioning.
So it was a strategic position for the defense of Connecticut in the War of 1812. There were thousands of militia at Fort Griswold, and perhaps because of this strong defense, we never had a battle here in in the War of 1812, which was actually 1813-14 here. But when the British chased Decatur in, most of the residents of Groton Bank and New London evacuated, taking their precious possessions with them and so forth, because they thought there would be a repeat of what happened in 1781. It is interesting that today, our long notable history in shipbuilding and our initial history in defense have now combined together for national history or national defense in the sense of submarines wrapped into one.
Yes.
And so that's another important chapter of Groton Bank history.
May I ask?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. So the thing that makes it so valuable was, in fact, the river itself. In other words, even in those days, it was deep enough that you could have these massive ships being not only built, but then later launched from that.
In fact, the ships were generally built on Groton Bank because the depth of the Thames is deeper on the Groton side than on the New London. Shipbuilding started in New London, but being much shallower, it was much more of a problem to launch ships. And so shipbuilding moved over here in the 1690s already.
Right, and it continues,
with the largest ship in colonial America, as I said, being launched here.
Yes.
Then, of course, Groton Bank was very prominent also in the whaling era. The you think, of course, New Bedford and was the #1 port, or Nantucket and New Bedford and New London. Nantucket was always #1. New Bedford and New London kind of oscillated back and forth, being 2 or 3. However, the whaling captains themselves, many of them lived on Groton Bank. one explanation was for those that had ships in New London, they could, being on the high hill, they could keep an eye on their ship when they were at home.
Spying on it, exactly. Very good.
But anyway, we had a number of famous whaling captains. Captain Ebenezer Rattler Morgan lived up here on Broad Street, and then in 1865 went out to sea to have the most profitable whaling voyage of his time. In 15 months, he made $100,000 profit. Well, in those days, that was huge money.
Right.
And then he built a larger house on Monument Street, which is still there today. And Captain William H. Allen, though, was another very successful whaling captain who a year later broke Rattler Morgan's record. And by the way, he was called Rattler Morgan because of the rattling good stories he could evidently tell.
Another good tidbit.
Yes.
And but anyway, William H. Allen beat that record a year later, coming in with a cargo that sold for $417,000.
Wow.
So, in the 1860s, this was huge money. And Captain Allen, although he lived in Groton Bank, actually sailed out of New Bedford. And Morgan sailed out of New London. And there were many other whaling captains some who were very successful. William Allen's brother, Charles, is supposedly had a record that would have beaten his brother, but the ship got in a sea storm and wrecked before could get the cargo back to port. So whaling was a difficult endeavor in those days. Captains sailed out of many different ports, and some were successful, some had shipwrecks, some had ice problems and what have you. But one of the interesting ones was Captain James Monroe Buddington, also a successful captain, not of the great wealth that Morgan and Allen were, but Captain Buddington's house is still here on Monument Street, and he is best known not for the fact that he caught such huge numbers of whales, but back in the 1850s, mid-1800s, the great exploration endeavor in the world was the search for the Northwest Passage.
Oh, yes.
Through the Arctic.
Yes.
And Captain Buddington had gone up there in search of whales and found this deserted British ship called the Resolute, and which had been captained by Sir John Franklin hunting for the Northwest Passage. And he brought this ship. Franklin and his crew froze to death in the Arctic. And for those of you who haven't followed these things, the British would typically sail in the summer to the Arctic, and then their ships would get frozen in, and they'd wait till the thaw, and then they'd sail a little more and get frozen in again. But Captain Buddington found this ship and brought it back to New London in Christmas Eve of 1855.
Wow.
Well, the U.S. returned it to England, and after it was decommissioned, Queen Victoria had a very ornate desk made out of its teak timbers, and that's the Resolute desk that sits in the Oval Office of the White House today.
Interesting story.
So
Yes.
Captain Buddington supposedly got a Resolute desk too, but we don't know whatever happened to that.
What happened to that?
And there were others of smaller and simpler vintage.
And you're going to allow the public to come and take a tour of these houses?
Not of the houses. Okay. When I give a tour, I will be giving a exterior tour of the neighborhood, and that is a good question because I want to get this other map wherever it is.
Right. Here we go. Yes.
The tour that I'll be giving. This is the modern version of the 1868 map that you saw. Many of you are familiar with Thames Street, Broad Street, Monument Street, and so forth. The tour that I'll be giving on both July 18th for the
Art on Groton Bank.
Art on Groton Bank Day.
Right.
We'll start here at the Bill Memorial Library at about 10 o'clock in the morning or 10:15.
Okay.
So those of you interested in the tour should arrive here about that time. I will give the same tour on Connecticut History Day, which is June 13th. Again, the Bill Library is participating in that, and so we'll start on Saturday, June 13th, again at the Bill Library, and do the same thing. The tour itself will go from the library to the monument and the Monument House. The monument of course, was completed in 1830 and is the first patriotic monument of its kind built in this country.
Wow.
It is older than Bunker Hill, the Saratoga Monument, the Washington Monument, da-da-da-da. And it was interestingly built by raising money from a lottery.
Oh, very interesting.
And
I would have thought.
completed in 1830. And as a memorial to the patriots that were killed in the Battle of Fort Griswold in 1781. So we'll go past this and in the Monument House, where, by the way, there is a great model that's been made of what the fort really looked like back in the 1775 era when it was first built. Then we'll go into the fort itself and down through the Sally Port and over here and past the Ensign Ebenezer Avery house. Ensign Ebenezer Avery was a defender of Fort Griswold who, and many of the wounded were taken to his house after the battle. The house was originally at Thames and Latham Streets, but restored and moved up to the grounds of Fort Griswold. And then we'll go down here and along Thames Street, describing some of the history I mentioned in terms of shipbuilding and so forth, and to the Avery Cop House Museum. Again, we won't go, I don't take people in these places, but point them out because they can then come back. On both days, these places will be open, so if they want to come back, and the Avery Cop House is clearly a remarkable place to see, and that
nice historic gem.
Yeah, nothing has been changed in it in over a century.
Right.
So,
now I see Avery. So the Avery family is associated with Groton in some capacity. Do you know anything about the Avery family?
Well, the original founder I shouldn't say founder, but certainly the man who pushed for Groton to become a separate town was James Avery. And his house used to stand on right opposite CBS on Long Hill Road, Pequannock Road.
Okay.
You'll see there's a monument on that little parklet there with some remnants of a fireplace. And that place used to be known as the Hive of the Averys. But it burned down in the late 1890s from a spark from a steam locomotive going by.
Oh my!
But anyway, another interesting point, though, is we think so much about freedom of religion today. Of course, back in colonial times, it was much more limited, or you could say we didn't even have it. You had to go to church in colonial times, and you could not have a church unless you were a town. You couldn't be a town until you had a church. So James Avery was also very much involved in the formation of the Groton Congregational Church, which formed in 1702, with the town being formed 3 years later.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Up until that point, people had to make their way across Groton to the ferry slip, which was opposite the Avery Cop House. And back in the 1600s, ferries were basically canoes, dugout canoes. And so
not fit for the car, right?
This was not the thing you necessarily wanted to do every Sunday morning in January.
Right. Exactly.
So there was a pressure for the town, for Groton to become a separate town, and they had to establish a church, as I said, to do that. The tour will then go up to Broad Street. There were they're not pictured here, but there are two notable places at the corner of Broad and Thames Street. On the southeast corner is the Dr. Amos Prentice Mother Bailey House, built in 1792. And the city of Groton now owns that and is starting to restore it. Dr. Prentice was the physician who tended the wounded in the Battle of Fort Griswold in 1781. And Anna Warner Bailey was a young girl who helped him in some of that back then. And later, but her real fame came in the War of 1812, or actually in June of 1813. Back in those days, for cannon to be successfully fired, you needed what was called cannon wadding, or flannel. I don't know quite how it was done, but I guess it was packed around the cannonball and so forth. Well, back in June of 1813, many people had evacuated Groton Bank because the British were off here and Decatur had been run up the river, and the fort was in fear of an attack, and soldiers were looking for cannon wadding, and they approached Mother Bailey on Thames Street, and she immediately dropped her flannel petticoat in the middle of Thames Street. Very risque for 1813. But that act of patriotism got her national fame, and she was later visited in this house by Presidents Monroe, Jackson, and Van Buren, as well as General Lafayette.
Oh, my.
So she had made quite a name for herself.
Yes.
Across the street, on the other corner, is the house of Major Noyes Barber, who was commander of the militia of the Connecticut Regiment back in the War of 1812. And Major Barber later went on to become a congressman.
Oh, okay.
He served in Congress from 1821 to 1835 in the days of Daniel Webster and those kind of guys. And he was a Jeffersonian Republican, which meant he basically supported the war in 1812, and he actually was a friend of Decatur and entertained Decatur in this house when he was trapped up the river and so forth. But Noyes Barber was controversial in the sense that I think it was 1824, the presidential election was a tie in the Electoral College, and it got thrown into the House of Representatives to resolve the tie. And instead of voting with the Jeffersonian Republicans, Major Barber voted for his friend John Quincy Adams, who became president. So anyway, we have lots of things happening in Groton Bank that relate not just to local history, but things that were happening on the national and the world scene as well.
One of my favorite historical things is to look at old cemeteries. Do we have any old cemeteries in this particular part?
Not in this area, but many of the people who lived here are buried either in the Colonel Ledyard Cemetery on Mitchell Street, which would be down about here I had a bigger map, or the Star Cemetery, which is up near Fairview.
Oh, okay. Yes. Okay.
Those are both very old cemeteries, and many of the people that lived in this neighborhood are buried.
And are people allowed to is the public allowed to see those cemeteries?
Oh, yeah, they're open to the public. Okay. And in fact, cemeteries can be a research tool, too. I know back when I was first doing research on Groton Bank, you know, cemeteries pretty clearly tell when what years a person lived.
Exactly.
And sometimes the whole family is in a
right,
plot.
Their parents and children, and yes, exactly.
And I know, well, my house is the Thomas Avery Minor House, which is at the corner of Monument and Meridian Streets.
Oh, right there by the library.
Right, just north of the library.
Okay.
And the Minor family has a big plot from the people that lived in that house.
Right.
And Colonel Ledyard himself is buried in the Ledyard Cemetery down here, and a number of other defenders as well. So the tour will then go across Broad Street, and throughout this tour I will point out the various types of architecture.
Oh, yes.
Groton Bank, having been settled first in 1655, has everything from colonial to some present, but the major and most of this area is houses that were built before 1900, and there are several hundred houses in this particular area. Of course, the oldest would be the colonials, which are centered chimney, that generally a two-story, and there's also some Cape Cod cottages. The next era of architecture was generally federal, and there are a couple examples of that. There are lots of Greek Revival style houses, which were built generally in the mid-1850s, and then followed by Victorian, which were built 1860s to 1900, and there are several subtypes, including the Mansard and Carpenter Gothic and Queen Anne and stick style and so forth. And we have examples of all of that. And then, as well as other forms, the Bill Library itself, a unique building, is a Richardson Romanesque style of architecture. As you may know, Richardson was the architect for the train station in New London.
Okay, yes.
But he was not the architect for the Bill Library, but it's a similar style called Richardson Romanesque, usually a very heavy brick stone kind of structure. So anyway, throughout all of this as well, there were many famous people that also lived in the Groton Bank area. I've mentioned Noyes Barber, who became a congressman, but before that, there was a fellow called John Ledyard the Traveler.
Okay.
And he was the most widely traveled man in the 1800s. And he grew up along the shores of Groton Bank. He was related to Colonel Ledyard and so forth. And others. Thomas Mumford was a patriot that lived also on Thames Street, on the same site where the Mother Bailey House is today. But he was also a privateer, so the British made certain his house got burned after the battle.
Harriet, you can certainly see why we're very excited to have Tom participate in some of our events this season. He certainly is knowledgeable and very enthusiastic.
Absolutely. So I have to ask you, Tom, how did you get interested in this? Because we were talking earlier, you were not by training a historian. So what got you interested in this?
Well, since my high school days, I had a basic interest in history. And in fact, at one point, maybe when I was a sophomore in high school, I thought maybe I'll major in history. But as time went on, I decided I would major in science instead, and majored in organic chemistry. But I've always retained this interest in history, and I came from a town called Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Oh, okay, far away, yes.
Far away.
Yes.
And of course, in Kalamazoo, there is not much that's older than 1900, late 1800s.
Okay.
In fact, I think the town was founded in 1890 or something, thereabouts. So I was very much intrigued by old houses. And I happened to, all circumstantial, but when I drove, I took a position with Pfizer as a research scientist.
Right. That's what brought you to Connecticut, yes.
Coming to Groton, interestingly, as I remember it now, of course, when you're used to driving straight roads in the Midwest, here is a challenge, and I actually got lost in the Groton Bank area.
Understood.
and I thought, this looks like an interesting group of old houses, and then I rented a different place. But then eventually, with interest in old houses, I decided to buy one.
Right.
Did, and have been restoring it for 45 years now.
Oh my. Okay. No, it's interesting. I think people forget about how the long colonial history of Connecticut and the importance of New England, not only the mills of the 19th century, but prior to that, the other kinds of activities, the importance of shipping. Although they don't talk much about it, there was certainly evidence of Connecticut ship owners involved in the slave trade as well, so that there is this incredible kind of connection between shipping and Connecticut, and some industries from starting in the 1600s, of course, slavery onto and the triangle, picking up the stuff from the Caribbean and bringing it back to Europe.
Yes, well, and that's another chapter of Groton Bank history that is there. We don't know very much about the specifics, but clearly the West Indies trade was a big activity in the early 1800s. And Major Noyes Barber was involved in that. The Ledyards were involved in that, and there are some indications they were also involved in the slave trade.
Sure.
But basically, our export was farm animals and lumber, timber. And, of course, the ships brought back rum and sugar.
Molasses,
right?
Yes,
so
yes,
forth.
from the Caribbean,
From the Caribbean, that was the basic trade. One of our members once said, "Well, we ought to have a program on rum runners from Groton Bank." That would sound interesting, but we don't know enough about them yet to do a program.
Do you go out to the public schools and give presentations to the kids?
I have done some, but not too much at the schools. I've given a number of presentations to historical groups and so forth as well.
Because I know that most of our children know, they can't even tell you when the American Civil War occurred. So they have such a lack of knowledge. I suppose the school day is so filled up with all kinds of stuff, we've sort of forgotten about the absolute importance of New England for the creation and for the development of this country. So it is unfortunate. Is there some way of getting the kids to see some of these beautiful old houses and museums?
Well, we have occasionally had open house tours, but that takes a lot more effort and cooperation of people. But I guess there are various ways. Number one, people can learn a fair amount on their own. Not only do we occasionally do these actual live planned walking tours,
right.
The Groton Bank Historical Association has published a booklet called Historic Groton Bank Walking Tour.
Oh, so you can take your own self-guided tour?
You can take a self-guided tour, which again basically shows the same map and their numbers representing the various houses and short description.
And where can people get this particular?
They are generally available at various places. We try to keep a supply at the Monument House Museum and also the Bill Library.
Okay.
And I will certainly hand them out to people who go on the tours.
Exactly.
I would like to make mention, speaking of old houses, that the Eastern Point Artisan Craft Show and Fair at the Zabriskie House is the Zabriskie House, an historic mansion also owned by the city.
Okay.
And it's named after Stephen Zabriskie, who was pretty much influential in developing Eastern Point as the public beach wood it is today. We believe that the house was built somewhere around 1917 by a woman named Elise Phelps. And the group that is putting on this event, we're called the Friends of the Zabriskie House.
Right.
And we are looking to raise funds to restore the interior elegance of this beautiful mansion. And during our event, I will be conducting tours of the upper floors of this house. The house is open for rental at the first level, but the second and third levels are closed to the public.
Right.
And they're remarkably intact, and they're very beautiful. So I will be conducting 4 tours of the upper floors of the home, and we certainly invite everyone to come and participate.
Is that on the June 6th date?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And the tours last year were very, very popular. People really were very anxious to see what this beautiful house looks like inside, and it's a way also to generate interest and following to restore the house.
Right, exactly.
Are there any other dates that it's open for these tours?
No. The first floor can be rented through the City Parks and Recs Department, but the upper floors are permanently closed at this point. We're hoping to change that if we can raise enough funds. We would like to be able to open those second and third floors for rental as well, for weddings and that type of thing. It would add a tremendous impact and potential for the house.
I know, for example, that my, like the Branford House, which is on the grounds of the University of Connecticut Avery Point, which is part of where some of this activity might be taking place on Eastern Point.
There's activities continually at Avery Point, but this particular event will be confined to the Eastern Point area, which is a beautiful peninsula beach, and there's also the other historic mansion known as the Tyler House, built by the Tyler family in 1904.
How did the city of Groton get in possession of these homes? Did they just kind of fall out and nobody started paying taxes on it?
Yes. They were purchased for the city back a good 50, 60 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Quite a long time ago. And the demographics just changed, and people were no longer, especially during the Depression, could no longer afford to have these homes that were only open for 2 months during the summer.
Right.
And so they started slowly just deteriorating, and the city came in and purchased them and developed Eastern Point Beach as we know it today as a public beach.
That is wonderful. That's really thinking ahead of the curve, which is usually what happens. The thing falls in, and then they think about, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with it?
The Tyler House too makes a unique beach house.
Yes, well, it's the Tyler House.
It's just the first floor, and I know nothing's been restored.
But it's a magnificent home, and it's a fantastic example of the shingle style that was very popular around the turn of the last century. And it's a very specific style. It's not just because it's shingles, but the type of windows and stonework and everything else, the granite that goes into building a house like that. So we're very pleased to have 2 jewels right there.
Right. Yes.
And
yes.
We'll be showing off one of them, the Zabriskie House.
Right. Right. And if people were interested in preservation, and can you see it by appointment, for example? Is it possible for the people to come and visit on an appointment basis?
They can contact the city's Parks and Recreation Department.
Okay.
And through that, it would be possible, I believe, to organize perhaps a tour of the upper floors through that department. They don't offer them on a regular basis or anything like that, but I'm sure the city's Parks and Rec Department would be eager to show off their gem. Okay,
that's because that is important. That we have so many of these beautiful old houses, some from the colonial period, and it's so costly to go ahead and to restore them. And of course, the government has tried. The federal government does some work in preservation, through monies through the National Park Service. But there's so many here in our community, and to have them lost, because then you lose a part of your history and the importance. Now we have beautiful homes starting from. Are there any homes left from the 1600s
Well, we don't we don't have anything that we document to the 1600s.
Okay.
There's part of a house on Thames Street that the owner who researched it said and that's the John Leeds house. It looks like a Greek revival today, but he says that the original part of the house, the kitchen, goes back to 1690.
Oh, okay.
But the exterior would not look 1690.
Right, it's been changed dramatically since.
Because it's been added on to and was much larger and da-da-da-da.
Right.
The oldest documented house that we know of is 1717, and that's the Joseph Latham House, which is on Meridian Street approximately. And it's a red Cape Cod cottage style of house. Mm-hmm.
So we have some famous names. Like Latham is a name that you see all the time also. Do you know anything about the Latham family?
Well, the first Latham who came to Groton was Carrie Latham, who operated the ferry from Groton, from New London to Groton in 1654. But the stipulation of his contract was that he had to live on the Groton side. So he built. So he was the first actual settler in 1655.
Wow.
Up until that point, he just went back and forth on the river. And there was a ferry tavern here from 1655. We don't know for certain. There are certainly some old houses up here on the hill, but we haven't been able to document them. It's documenting and researching these houses that far back gets to be very difficult.
There's no land records?
Well, there may be land records, but they aren't very precise descriptions. You know, they go from the lot goes from the rock here to the tree over there to the fence and so forth.
Right.
And so
no surveyors there with the measuring. Right, exactly.
And so it's very difficult in many cases. And the other thing that adds a big problem to documenting the age of a house, and we as the Groton Bank Historical Association do research houses and like to have people put historical markers on when we determine the original owner or occupant, and within a span of 5 years when it was built. But often you run into these cases where the original owner-occupant bought the land, say, in 1700, and then nothing was sold till 1750. You don't know just when the house was built. Sometimes, they were built and then sold a couple years later, and it's obvious.
Can you tell by the materials, and this is for both of you, can you tell by the materials that are actually being used that something about the dating of a house?
You can, but that doesn't necessarily get you within a span of 5 years. Okay. Clearly there are, and you can tell from the exterior architecture. For example, most of the Greek revival houses in Groton Bank were built between 1840 and 1860.
Okay.
In fact, probably all of them were. That was a popular style of house back then. And center chimney colonials generally go to the mid-1700s, like the Ebenezer Avery house at the fort.
What's very interesting when I give the tours of the upper floors of the Zaversky house is the style of the moldings and the picture moldings and the various base moldings that are used. And it's very interesting, and people are fascinated when I point out when you get to the secondary rooms section on the third floor, the moldings become much less ornate, and they become very, very simple. And we can tell that that's where either the children's and or the servants' area would be. That's where the back stairs come up, and usually there's a door to separate those. So people are fascinated when you point out those little variations.
Little detail, those are very important.
Notice.
Exactly.
I have my own house is a Victorian, a Queen Anne style, built in 1894 by a very wealthy Groton businessman by the name of Thomas Avery Minor. He
That Avery family did it
well,
again.
His grandfather was an Avery, and so he got that name, as well. And he always used the Avery name along with Minor. But my house too is you can. I didn't realize this when I first bought it, but just what Mark is saying. In the Victorian era and in other eras, people put their money where it would show. That is where the guests would see.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
And so the front of the house is more ornate and fancy than the back of the house.
Right.
And as you go into my house, from the front hallway to the parlor, the living room, which has a very ornate wooden fireplace, to the kitchen, the moldings are much simpler in the kitchen because that was basically servants' quarters back then.
Right.
Few of these big houses were. In the case of my house, I understand it was operated with a full-time maid housekeeper and a full-time gardener handyman from the time it was built till 1950.
Right.
Most of them were at that time. It was a much more formal life than we have now.
Right.
Even in the community of Eastern Point, which was largely, as I mentioned earlier, a summer community, where these homes would only be open 2 months out of the year. But the usual procedure was you would send up some servants ahead of you, they would open house, clean the house, and then you would come up with the rest of your servants and just occupy it for that short amount of time.
Can we tell from houses that were built in the 1700s about slave quarters? Is there any evidence of that?
I have not seen anything or heard of anything in the Groton Bank area of slave quarters, but clearly, there were in essence slaves. But I mean, Colonel Ledyard had his body servant who fought in the battle too, and so did other top-ranking people. But where they lived, whether they lived in the same house or a little lean-to out back, who knows? I don't know. But most of these larger houses in Groton Bank did have servants' quarters. And in the case in my house, the maid's room was up on the 3rd floor.
Right.
And interestingly, her toilet facility was in the basement.
Oh, my.
Because in those days with social, there was no way the servants could mingle with the family, in terms of using their facilities.
Okay, yes,
it was a caste structure, basically.
Yes.
But of course, that sounds terrible, but when you consider that the maid housekeeper probably spent most of her time in the kitchen, and the basement wasn't too far away. But I still have an old water closet.
Oh, yes, yes.
In the basement.
And that's interesting. Are all these homes, have they been registered with the state and the federal government as being historic?
Well, the Groton Bank area consists of 2 historic districts, which are registered with the Department of Interior, and the various. The Groton Bank Historic District is basically this area north of Fort Griswold.
Okay.
And then there is a separate Fort Griswold Historic District.
All right.
Both registered with the Department of Interior. And to register with the Department of Interior, you have to make a convincing argument that most of the houses are historic. There are few communities where each and every house, new houses have crept in here and there. And the registration on the National Register of Historic Places is more of an honorary designation than anything that has legal teeth in terms of what you can do and can't do.
So it doesn't mean anything about maintaining something in terms of the facade that it has to
make? No, the only thing you can't do that I'm aware of is if your house is registered in a National Historic District, you can't use federal funds to tear it down.
We have an historic district in the city of Groton in the Eastern Point area.
Oh, okay.
I happen to be the chairperson of the Eastern Point Historic District Commission, and we do regulate, even though not all of our homes, as Tom said, are antique homes, we do regulate anything changes that people propose to do on the outside, trying to keep the integrity of the historic district, at the same time understanding that certain things do have to be modified for modern living.
Okay.
We should state there are two forms of historic district. The state has a historic district, and what Mark is referring to for Eastern Point in the regulation is the state historic district statutes.
Exactly.
We in Groton Bank back in the 70s did have a historic district study committee that also proposed a state historic district. However, that has to be approved by 2/3 of the property owners in order to become effective. And although we had a majority, we didn't
have 2/3.
But nevertheless, the process went on, and the area was designated as on the national.
So we have this wonderful stuff. We're going to kind of wrap this up. So I want to, again, reiterate again for the people what the events are. So Mark, you want to give us another handle on those events again?
Yes, we have the Eastern Point Artisan Craft Show and Fair in June. Eastern Point Beach will be a very exciting event. We have Art on Groton Bank in July on the Bill Memorial Library, and we have the Thames Street Block Party, all of which are through Summer in the City.
Summer in the City. Go to that website, yes.
We have the 225th anniversary of the Coast Guard. This is Coast Guard Summer, and we have a component of the Coast Guard at each event. Specifically, we're very excited that on July 18th at 1 p.m., we invite everyone to come and hear the Coast Guard Woodwind Quintet.
Quintet,
difficult to say.
Yes.
They will be performing at 1 o'clock.
Very good, very good. And I also want to let our audience know that we here at SEC TV are looking to create ourselves a gallery. There once was a gallery here in Groton. There is no longer. So the studio, with its beautiful new walls of white, has decided to very much become an art gallery. So we're having our grand opening, our first art show, and it's going to be on June 18th, right here in the studio, off of Route 1, in the next to, between Benny's and the post office, and in Groton Shoppers Plaza. So again, 5:30 to 8 p.m. right here to come and see some art from our local artists. And if you are a local artist out there, please let us know about it, and we'd be happy to display your art and to sell your art. Tell all your friends. So we want you to come on out June 18th. There's going to be some light refreshments and some wonderful entertainment from a lovely group that was on my show before, the Thread City String Band. So you'll get some live music and some wonderful artwork. And again, I want to very much thank my guests, Mark and Tom. Listen, the city of Groton is hot. So this summer in the city, get out there. Do not hesitate. You'll look and see things in the day newspaper, but go to the website to check out for events. So thank you, my guests. This is Harriet Grayson, your host and producer of Community Culture Showcase. I thank you very much for joining us. And next time, we'll have some other wonderful and interesting guests.